My name is Ashley, and I was born into a seemingly ideal household. My father earned a respectable wage as an engineer at a nearby firm. Mother remained home and cleaned the house. Laughter and affection abounded. They were pleasant in the early years. When my dad first saw me when he got home from work, his face lit up. He would remark, "There's my little princess," and he would grab me tightly in his arms. As she watched us from the kitchen doorway, Mom would grin. However, life has a habit of surprising you with unexpected turns of events. It all changed when I was 7 years old. It began on a typical Tuesday. Dad was pale and sweating when he arrived home from work. He flopped onto the couch and rubbed his chest while I stood on the stairs. Mom said, "Maybe you should see a doctor." Dad gave a shake of his head. "No, it won't last." "Sarah, don't worry." Dad abruptly fell from his chair and gripped his chest when we went down to supper that evening. Mom ran to his side, screaming. She screamed, her voice hoarse with fright, "Ashley, call 911." I phoned the number and told the operator what had occurred, hands trembling. It seemed like an endless wait for the ambulance to arrive. The hospital visits and quiet talks that followed were a haze. Words like permanent damage and heart attack were thrown around, and I wasn't sure what they meant. Dad had changed by the time he returned home. He was no longer able to work in the factory and took a new job in an office, which paid much less. That's when the altercation began. "Sarah, we can't afford this." Dad would yell while flinging cash about. "So what am I supposed to do about it?" Mom would lash out. "You should do that. I'm not going to work on it." I used to hide in my room and attempt to muffle their irate sounds by covering my ears with a pillow. I heard Mom talking to Dad's folks on the phone one evening. "You must assist us," she said. "We're having trouble here." However, Grandpa and Grandma would have none of it. Grandma's voice crackled across the speaker as she remarked, "You've got insurance money, Sarah. It's about time you started working too. John can't possibly accomplish everything right now." Mom muttered something beneath her breath and slammed the phone. And that's when the conflicts grew worse. Dad insisted we didn't have the money, but Mom continued asking for more. Dad looked thinner and more exhausted every day, and I watched helplessly. Dad suffered another heart attack 3 years after the first. He didn't make it this time. My father passed away when I was 10 years old. After Dad's burial, everything quickly shifted. I heard my mother and my grandparents arguing angrily, with words flying like daggers. "You're hoarding all the stuff for yourself," Granny charged, her voice quivering with rage. "How about Ashley?" John wished for someone to look after her. Mom said icily, "I'm her mother. I'll make the best decision for her." At the time, I had no idea why they were arguing. To me, phrases like embezzlement, money, and inheritance were simply huge words. All I knew was that Mom appeared to be tougher somehow different. Before I could process it all, Mom gave me another shocking revelation. One day, while she was putting on lipstick, she said, "Ashley, I'm getting married again," without even looking at me. The nuptials were a haze. Mom seemed content, but I was confused. Tom, her new spouse, hardly acknowledged my presence. I quickly realized that I was not a part of their plans. My mother sat me down one morning. "Ashley, you will be spending some time with Grandma and Grandpa." "But why?" I questioned, trying not to cry. "Tom and I require some alone time," she stated in a tone that excluded any possibility of disagreement. I was sent to live with my grandparents without warning. It was much larger and more opulent than our previous house. Kind, Grandma and Grandpa always made sure I had all I needed. But I missed Mom very much, even with their affection. A few months went by. I became accustomed to spending time with my grandparents and found solace in their constant presence. But I secretly wished Mom would return to get me. Then she did, without warning. "Ashley, get in your suitcase." Mom stated, "You're coming home," during one of her infrequent visits. My heart leaped. She wanted me back. She missed me. As I bid Grandma and Grandpa farewell, I promised to pay them frequent visits. Still, my happiness was fleeting. Upon arriving home, I understood why Mom had truly brought me back. With a Wrigley bundle in her palm, she exclaimed, "This is your baby brother, Jake. You'll be assisting me in caring for him." The harsh reality set in. I was called back to serve as a nanny, not because Mom missed me. School, housework, and babysitting took up my days as Mom went out with Tom or spent time with her friends. It fell to me to watch Jake. Schoolwork slipped from people's minds. There was little time for studying between changing diapers and tidying the house. One evening, as I struggled to calm a kicky Jake while trying to finish a book report, Tom came home early. "Where's your mother?" he asked, frowning at the mess in the living room. "She went out with her friends," I mumbled, bouncing Jake on my hip. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll take him. You try to clean up a bit." As I picked up toys and wiped down surfaces, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what family was supposed to be like? An absent mother, a distant stepfather, and a child forced to grow up too fast. My life as a makeshift nanny took its toll. I was exhausted all the time, falling asleep in class and forgetting assignments. It didn't take long for my teachers to notice. One day, Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher, pulled me aside after class. "Ashley, is everything okay at home?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. I mumbled something about being tired, but Mrs. Thompson wasn't buying it. A week later, I found out she called Grandma, and Grandma, in turn, called Mom. After a heated argument, Mom slammed the phone down and turned to me. "Pack your bags," she said coldly. "You're going back to your grandparents." I was torn between relief and hurt. Part of me was glad to escape the endless chores and babysitting, but another part felt rejected all over again. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was like before, stable, loving, and focused on my well-being. My grades started to improve, and I felt like a kid again. Months passed with barely a word from Mom. Then out of the blue, Grandma got another call. "Sarah's divorced Tom," Grandma told me later, her voice a mix of surprise and disappointment. "He's taken Jake and moved to another city." I felt a pang of sadness for my little brother, but also a strange sense of relief. At least he was with his dad, who seemed to care more than Mom ever did. That's when Mom discovered social media. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Mom was posting constantly, selfies at clubs, pictures of fancy meals, and lots of photos with a guy who looked barely older than 18. But it wasn't just new boyfriends. Mom was experimenting. Soon her post took a different turn. "Just got my new girls," read one post, accompanied by a photo of Mom in a tight top, her chest suddenly much larger than I remembered. The surgeries didn't stop there. Every few months, there'd be a new post about another procedure. Bigger hips, plumper lips, even her eyes looked different. I watched from afar as Mom transformed herself post by post, surgery by surgery. The woman in the photos looked nothing like the mother I remembered. It was like watching a stranger play dress-up with my mom's life. Through all of this, Mom never once asked about me. No calls on my birthday, no messages asking how school was going, nothing. At first, it hurt. I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. But as time passed, the pain dulled. I stopped expecting her calls, stopped hoping she'd suddenly remember she had a daughter. The years flew by faster than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage in my cap and gown, accepting my high school diploma. Grandma and Grandpa cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Mom wasn't there, but I'd stopped expecting her to show up long ago. Thanks to my grandparents' generosity, I headed off to college that fall. They insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests. "Your education is the best investment we could make," Grandma said firmly. "Just focus on your studies." And I did. College was challenging, exciting, and everything I'd hoped for. I made new friends, discovered my passion for marketing, and for the first time in my life, felt like I was truly becoming my own person. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a local advertising firm. The day I got my first paycheck, I knew what I had to do. "I'm moving out," I told Grandma and Grandpa over dinner. "I found an apartment I can afford." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure, Ashley?" Grandma asked. "You know you're always welcome here." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. But I'll visit all the time, I promise." Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a life for myself. But as I was flourishing, my grandparents were fading. It started with little things. Grandpa forgetting where he put his glasses. Grandma getting tired more easily. Then came the doctor's appointments, the concerned looks, the hushed phone calls. I spent every free moment with them, trying to repay a fraction of the love and care they'd given me. Weekends were filled with quiet afternoons, watching old movies, or just sitting and talking. One chilly autumn morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Grandpa had passed away in his sleep. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and tearful relatives. Through it all, Grandma was a pillar of strength, but I could see the light had gone out of her eyes. Grandma didn't last long after Grandpa died. It was like she'd lost her will to go on without him. 3 months later, I was planning another funeral. As I was going through Grandma's address book, I found Mom's number and, against my better judgment, sent a text. "Grandma's funeral is tomorrow. It would mean a lot if you came." The reply came hours later. "Sorry, can't make it." Those people were practically strangers to me anyway. Those people, my grandparents, the ones who'd raised me, loved me, supported me, strangers to her. I deleted her number right then and there. After the funeral, the lawyer called me in to read the will. I sat in his office, feeling numb as he explained that Grandma and Grandpa had left me everything. Their house, their savings, all of it. "It's a considerable sum," the lawyer said gently. "They wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Even in death, they were still looking out for me. As I left the lawyer's office, clutching the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. I'd lost the two people who'd been my rock for so long, but their final gift meant I'd never have to worry about financial security again. The task of sorting through my grandparents' belongings was both emotionally draining and strangely cathartic. Each object held a memory, a piece of the life we'd shared. I worked my way through the house, room by room, until I reached Grandpa's study. His desk was a treasure trove of old documents, each neatly filed away. As I sifted through them, a yellowed envelope caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat when I saw my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was Dad's will, dated just before he died. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. "To my dear Sarah," it read, "I leave the bulk of our savings, but I ask that a portion be set aside for Ashley's college education. Our daughter's future is important, and I want to ensure she has the best opportunities possible." The paper crumpled in my fist as a wave of anger washed over me. Mom had known all along. She'd had money specifically meant for my education, money Dad had wanted me to have, and she'd kept it all for herself. Suddenly, all those arguments I'd overheard as a child made sense. Grandma and Grandpa accusing Mom of embezzlement, of taking everything for herself. They'd been right. For a moment, I considered calling Mom, demanding an explanation. But what good would it do? She'd made her choices long ago. I decided then and there to let it go. I had a good life, a bright future ahead of me. I didn't need to dredge up old hurts. Little did I know, the past wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. I almost dropped it when I saw the caller ID. Mom. Hello, I answered, my voice uncertain. Ashley, it's your mother. I waited, not sure what to say. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, her voice sounding different than I remembered. I miss you, sweetheart. I want us to try and fix things between us. Can we meet? I was speechless. After years of silence, this was the last thing I expected. Okay, I said finally. Let's meet. We agreed on a cafe near my office for the following Saturday. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman waving at me from a corner table looked nothing like the mother I remembered. Her face was taut and unnaturally smooth, her lips plump, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Years of surgeries had transformed her into someone I might have passed on the street without a second glance. We ordered coffee, and for a while, we made awkward small talk. She asked about my job, and I asked about her life. It felt surreal, like I was having lunch with a stranger who happened to know details about my childhood. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. Ashley, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. I haven't been a good mother to you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After your father died, I was lost. I made a lot of mistakes. I pushed you away when I should have held you close. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at this woman, this stranger with my mother's eyes, and felt a complex swirl of emotion. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations for years of neglect, for the money she'd kept for me. But another part, a part I thought had died long ago, just wanted my mom back. I don't know, I said honestly. It's been a long time, Mom. A lot has happened. She nodded, looking down at her coffee. I understand, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I've missed so much of your life. I want to be part of it again, if you'll have me. The next few weeks were surreal. Mom and I met for coffee, went shopping, and even had dinner together a couple of times. It felt strange, like trying on an old sweater that didn't quite fit anymore, but I was cautiously optimistic. One afternoon, as we were finishing up lunch, Mom casually asked, "So, sweetie, did your grandparents leave you anything?" The question caught me off guard. Yeah, I replied hesitantly. They left me their house and some savings. Mom's eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. Oh, that's wonderful. You know, I've been meaning to ask you a favor. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm getting married again to Daniel. You remember him, right? He's 16 years younger than me. We want to have a bachelorette party, and I was wondering if we could use your grandparents' house. It's such a lovely place for a celebration. I blinked, trying to process this information. You're getting married again. She waved her hand dismissively. Third's the charm, right? So, about the house. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Sure, I guess that would be okay. Mom clapped her hands in delight. Oh, thank you, darling. You won't regret this. The next day, she came to pick up the keys. I'll give them back at the wedding, she said, handing me an ornate invitation. 1 month from today. I can't wait for you to be there. As I watched her drive away, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was happy that Mom wanted me at her wedding. Another part couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. The weeks flew by, and I was busy with work and my own life. But as the wedding approached, I decided to check on the house and make sure everything was in order for Mom's party. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Frowning, I walked up to the front door and knocked. A stranger answered. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking confused. "I'm here to check on the house," I said. "I'm the owner." The man's frown deepened. "I think there's been a mistake. My wife and I just bought this house. We're in the middle of moving in." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandparents." The man called his wife over, and they explained that they'd bought the house from a woman whose description matched my mother's new look perfectly. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mom had done it again. She'd manipulated me, used me, all to steal my inheritance. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. How could she have sold the house? She didn't have the right, unless she'd forged documents. For a moment, I considered calling the police right then and there. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold anger settled in its place. No, I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. Mom thought she'd won, that she'd pulled off her scheme without a hitch. She was expecting to celebrate her new marriage, to start her new life flush with the money from my grandparents' house. Well, she had another thing coming. The week leading up to Mom's wedding was a flurry of activity. I reached out to every relative I could think of, aunts, uncles, cousins, and told them everything. The fraudulent sale of the house, the years of neglect, the stolen college fund. To my relief, they were unanimously outraged. I outlined my plan, asking each of them to play along at the wedding, to act as if everything was normal until I gave the signal. They all agreed, eager to see justice served. The day of the wedding arrived. I dressed in a beautiful blue dress, my hair and makeup carefully done. To all outward appearances, I was the picture of a supportive daughter. The ceremony was lavish, clearly sparing no expense. My stomach churned, knowing that this extravagance was likely funded by the sale of my grandparents' home. When it came time for the reception, I waited patiently as guest after guest offered their congratulations. Finally, I approached the microphone, a serene smile plastered on my face. "I'd like to say a few words about my mother," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Then, with deliberate slowness, I reached into my purse and pulled out a white cap. The words "My mother is a thief" blazed across it in bright red letters. I placed it on my head, and around the room, my relatives did the same. The silence was deafening. Mom's face drained of color as I continued. "Let me tell you a story," I said, my voice ringing out in the stunned quiet. "A story about a woman who abandoned her child, who stole money meant for that child's education, and who most recently fraudulently sold a house she had no right to sell, a house left to her daughter by loving grandparents." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Mom trying to signal me to stop, but I pressed on, recounting years of neglect and deception. "And now," I concluded, "she stands here celebrating her wedding with money obtained through fraud, money stolen from her own daughter." The young groom, Daniel, turned to Mom, his face a mask of shock and disgust. "Sarah, is this true?" he demanded. Under the weight of dozens of accusing stares, Mom finally broke. "Yes," she wailed. "But I love you, Daniel. I'll do anything for you. Please, please don't leave me." She fell to her knees, clutching at Daniel's legs, mascara streaking down her face. The beautiful bride was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered woman. The wedding reception devolved into utter chaos. Guests were shouting, some in anger, others in disbelief. Amidst the uproar, Mom suddenly sprang to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little rubbish." She screamed at me, her voice raw with fury. "I should have aborted you when I had the chance. I wish you'd never been born." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I stood my ground, watching as years of pent-up resentment and bitterness poured out of her. Daniel, who had been standing in shocked silence, finally found his voice. "That's enough," he said, his tone ice cold. "Sarah, I can't believe I almost married you. You're a monster." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Mom standing alone in her white dress, mascara streaking down her face. I took off my cap, the words "my mother is a thief" now seeming almost quaint compared to the ugly truth that had been revealed. With a final deliberate motion, I threw it at her feet. "Goodbye, Mom," I said quietly, then turned and walked away, leaving her screaming and sobbing behind me. The ensuing weeks were filled with a frenzy of court cases. I immediately went to the police and reported Mom's fraud and forgery. With the faked paperwork, the testimony of witnesses, and Mom's own admission of guilt during the wedding, the case seemed strong. Justice was done in the end. Mom received a jail term of several years for her misdeeds. She was forced to reimburse extra damages for her years of deceit, as well as repay the funds from the fictitious property sale. I experienced a strange mixture of emotions as I stood outside the courthouse following the final hearing. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced, sadness for the mother I never truly had, but most of all, I felt free. Free from the burden of unspoken truths and repressed anger that I had carried for so long. I bought a little, comfortable house for myself with the settlement money. It was smaller than my grandparents', but it was all mine. I put the remainder away for later, considering the family I want to have in the future. Life found its new cadence. My work was going great. I was meeting new people, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly content and at ease. Then out of the blue, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello," with caution I replied. "Ashley?" There was a voice, a young man. "It's Jake, your brother." A beat skipped in my heart. Jake and I had not spoken since our childhood. He went on, I heard about what happened with Mom. "I wanted to hear your side of the story, if that's okay." That night, we spoke for hours on end. Since the divorce, Jake had lived with his father, where he was protected from the majority of Mom's pranks. I informed him, and he appeared astonished. But more than anything, he felt sorry that we'd lost so many years together. Jake and I began mending our friendship from that day on. We had coffee together, texted one another, and gradually grew to know one another as adults. We had a lot of missed time to make up for, so it wasn't always simple, but it was well worth it. I can't help but think back on the path that led me here as I sit here and gaze out the window of my new house. The journey wasn't simple. It was full of treachery, pain, and grief, but it also brought me to strength I didn't know I had, long overdue justice, and a brother I had believed I had lost.